As we start to consider the legal and federal and state requirements with families as we apply it to Matthew's case, I want to take a look at it in two very similar but very different examples. The first one's going to be very specific. Let's take a look at what happens when a student moves in or transitions from school to school and that student has an IEP. There are a lot of, we can directly apply procedural safeguards from Chapter 1, notification, consent, and the IEP is a legal document, again, mostly from Chapter 1, when we take a look at Matthew's case. When a student moves to a new school, there are two ways that the school finds out about an IEP. Ideally, like in Matthew's case, the parent brings that IEP in. Matthew's mom brought it in before school even started in the fall, and the school knows right away that there's an IEP. This often happens also when the sending school is close, like in the same city or county or area. That's ideal what happens. Unfortunately, sometimes schools don't know that that student has an IEP when they enroll. That could be because there's a lag in time. The records are sent, not electronically. Maybe they're sent through snail mail. Maybe sometimes there's a reason families don't share that a student has an IEP. Regardless of the way the school finds out about the IEP, services begin as soon as the school knows there's an IEP. No later than the moment, I'm being a little facetious, but services start as soon as the school knows that there's an IEP. There are two things that can happen from here. The receiving school, Matthew's new school, could really what they need to do is immediately review the IEP, communicate with the team, which includes the family, and decide and evaluate the services that Matthew needs and how that's going to look at his new school. Matthew's case is very clear about this, that this did not happen. That school, once they reviewed the IEP, should have made the decision that they adopt the old IEP within those timelines. Yes, we can do this. We're going to enact this IEP and have a new one at its yearly expiration. Or they have 30 school days to assess. Doesn't have to be a diagnostic test, but evaluate Matthew and have a new IEP. If they decide that that IEP from the sending school from his third grade year is not applicable or needs a lot of amendments or modifications or edits, they can have a new one within 30 school days. But make no mistake, Matthew receives supports and accommodations during that time. There is an IEP. There are special ed services that need to happen. We know that did not happen for whatever reason. We know that did not happen in Matthew's case. Secondly, let's take a look at the legal requirements for families, again from Chapter 1, specifically pages 15 through 18. Family requirement, family participation, family engagement, family relationships is law. It's not an extra week or topic that we throw into special education teacher prep courses. It's part of IDEA and the law. It's a major principle, and it boils down to procedural, which is following the rules and the compliance, or substantive. And that's a little bit harder. That's where it can be subjective. Let's talk about procedural first. If you go back to the procedural safeguards and the example I just gave of a move-in IEP, we have to remember that the IEP is a contract between the family and the school. Let's go ahead and assume that the IEP from third grade was compliant. There may have been some procedural issues, kindergarten through third grade. We don't exactly have the data for that. But for this case, let's apply the law and regulations to what's happening at his new school. We know Matthew went 5 weeks without IEP services, even though the school knew about the IEP. Procedural, a huge problem. This school has also violated a lot of procedural safeguards in not notifying parents and not communicating with parents, but that becomes a little more subjective. The law states that parents need to have meaningful participation in the IEP process, the evaluation process, all processes. What does meaningful mean? That's where that subjective piece comes in. We know it needs to be reciprocal. The school and the family share decision making and power over decisions. We know that it needs to be more than just attending an IEP or a meeting. The school has the burden of proof, I would say, in that these meetings, the parents can understand what's happening and they have an understanding about what's happening. It boils down to best practice, which is not at all being followed here in Matthew's case. Let's think about this new school and let's specifically focus on the ways Mrs. Winters is breaking laws and regulations. Mrs. Winters changes Matthew's IEP. I mean, she doesn't physically go in and change it and have an IEP and change it, but she denies services. She tells the family the speech teacher's only there once a week. The speech teacher's case is already full. Checklists are not going to work. Accommodations and supports are not fair. That IEP just isn't going to work. Mrs. Winters made that decision without any team or family participation whatsoever, and has also thrown them into procedural noncompliance because now Matthew's not getting the support that he needs. She essentially dismissed the IEP with no notice, no input, and no team meeting or no team understandings at all. I could go into lots and lots of details about all of the laws and regulations that are problematic here. I would encourage you to review pages 15 through 18 in chapter 1, make some of your own assumptions, but really focus on the laws and requirements that are essentially broken in Matthew's 4th grade year.